You are listening to the Keep the Weight Off podcast with Dr. Angela and Marshall, episode 146.
Welcome to the Keep the Weight Off podcast, where we bust all the dieting myths and discover not just how to lose weight, but more importantly, how to keep it off. We go way beyond the food, and we use science and psychology to give you strategies that work. And now your host, Dr. Angela Zechmann.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the podcast this week. We're doing things a little bit different because Dr. Angela has laryngitis, so we decided to pull a very popular talk from the 2020 Keep the Weight Off Summit for you to listen to. In this talk, Dr. Angela interviewed Dr. Nancy Levin, an expert in boundaries. This interview has so many pearls of wisdom from Nancy that you will be blown away. So without further ado, here's the interview. Enjoy.
So Nancy is a master coach and best-selling author, several books, including her latest called Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free. And she is a former event director at Hay House. So Hay House is a big publishing company. I can't even imagine what that must have been like being there. She worked there as the event director for over a decade. And she's also the creator of the Levin Life Coach Academy and Destination Me, which are offering in-depth coaching and training programs designed to support students and clients to make themselves a priority by setting boundaries that stick. Awesome. Yay. So this is your specialty, and
yes,
amazing at this. So my first question for you is something that you're probably not expecting. What is something you are incredibly proud of, yet rarely have the chance to brag about? I'm going to give you an opportunity to brag.
Oh, wow.
A good question, isn't it?
Yeah. It's so strange. The thought that came into my head first is that I'm incredibly proud to be single. And I rarely get to talk about how happy I am about that, because most people want to impose and project something else on me.
Ah, okay. So you're proud about being single. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yay. Do you want to talk any more about that? Okay.
I don't need to.
Okay. So you are an expert in learning how to set boundaries.
Yeah.
And so my first question for you is going to be, okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to set boundaries? And how do you define that?
Sure. So a boundary is a limit that we set for ourselves. So our boundaries are very personal. So a boundary is a limit that we set around what we will or will not do, will or will not accept, and will or will not tolerate. So my boundaries are very personal to me, and it's really about knowing what's okay and what's not okay for me. And it is, my boundaries are between me and me first and foremost, even if they involve another person. And so these are the important pieces about the sort of defining boundaries.
Okay. So if I'm going to set boundaries, they are really based in my relationship with myself.
That's right. So yeah, the misconception and really one of the biggest myths I will bust around boundaries is that other people cross our boundaries.
Ooh.
So if my boundaries are being crossed, I'm the one crossing my own boundaries, because it's not anyone else's job to uphold, honor, or respect, or maintain my boundaries. It's up to me.
That's huge.
It's huge. It's a huge shift. But what it does is it really moves us out of victim and blame and into responsibility and empowerment.
Okay. So can you give me an example of what you mean by this? Because right now it all feels like it's up here. And how do I apply this?
Yeah, so simply it's about getting clear about what is okay for me and what's not okay for me. So, checking in whether it's around, so it could even, so let's say it's around food.
Okay.
What's okay and what's not okay around what I decide I'm going to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then if presented with it, many people will go into the default of, well, he or she made this, I have to eat it.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
Right. And so to really be able to say, you know what, I so appreciate that you went out of your way to make this. However, I'm actually choosing to take care of myself by eating something else.
Mm-hmm.
So even just determining what's okay for me and how I'm going to respond and how I'm going to take care of myself and honor my own needs. That's really what it's about. You know, we have this idea that other people need, that we want other people to take care of our needs.
Yeah.
Take care of our needs first and foremost. So why would anyone else take care of our needs if we're not willing to?
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah.
And so, you know, often people relate to boundaries. And I bet if we asked, you know, in the chat for people just to say, like, what comes up when you think about boundaries? Most people,
feel free, guys, if you
feel
want to.
free. If you want to pop into the chat, what comes up when you even just hear the word boundaries? You know, most people respond with something like, it means I'm mean. It means I'm putting up a wall. It means, you know, people really have this orientation toward boundaries, that it's bad, or that it's, you know, that I'll look a certain way, right? Cutting people off, saying no is hard, you know, these kinds of responses. So what I really want to inspire you all to start thinking about is that boundaries are not simply about restriction or constriction or deprivation. Boundaries are expansive. So I love this. Letitia says, limitation and self-limitation, little space. I'm here to actually propose the opposite. Boundaries create expansion. Boundaries support us in being able to consciously choose and carefully curate how we want our life to be. And so by really getting clear about what's okay and what's not okay for me, I'm creating more space in my life for what is good and for what I want. So, you know, I love this too. You know, Barbara's saying, how can I be nice while making boundaries? What's the best way to say things? And this is actually a really important point, because one of the number one reason most people don't set boundaries is they don't know what to say.
Yeah. And
so I really like to work with people around creating a script, because most of us also relate to boundaries thinking that the language is, you can't do this, or don't do this, or I need you to do this or not do this, that it's very outward and it's very pointing a finger at someone else. So I really want to be clear that boundaries are not about anyone else's behavior. Boundaries are not about anyone else doing or not doing anything. So boundaries are really, you know, again, as I've been saying, you know, what's okay and not okay for me and what I'm going to do to take care of myself. And that's really the way we speak about the boundary, not pointing a finger externally, but by saying about what my experience is and how I'm going to take care of myself.
This just takes everything and twists it, because I've been taught so many different things about how I feel blank when you do this and I need you to change, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And so instead it's, you know, I feel X when you do or say Y. And in order to take care of myself, I'm going to do Z.
Yes.
And that's really what it is.
Change. Not I need you to
change.
Right. This to take care of myself. Okay.
Right. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, the second thing I would say around this is, you know, so the number one reason we don't set boundaries is we don't know what to say. And the second piece here is we're so concerned and overconsumed with being nice and being liked. And so the more we avoid any external conflict, the more internal conflict we're creating. And we create chaos in our own system and in the world around us when we avoid the truth. So, yeah. And so, you know, think about this. If any of you watching relate to being a people pleaser, a peacekeeper, a conflict avoider, someone who doesn't rock the boat, you know, it's really, of course, you know, that's right. We don't want to hurt others, so we hurt ourselves. And we're so used to taking the hit. We're so much more comfortable feeling our own pain than thinking we have anything to do with causing anyone else any discomfort. And so what we need to be able to see here is that conflict isn't necessarily about confrontation. Conflict doesn't automatically have to lead to an argument or a fight. Conflict can simply be the illumination of our differences. You show up in your truth, I show up in my truth, and we're just showing up with our differences. We can stay connected in the conflict.
We're just two different people who have.
That's right.
Like I like pink, you like purple. Like
that's right.
Feel.
That's right. That's right. But what happens is we generally go A to Z thinking. We go all the way to the other side of, if I have a difference, we're going to break up, or if I have a difference, I'm going to get fired, or something like that. And so we don't stand in the truth of our difference. And it's really a symptom of a larger issue, which is that if we're so busy avoiding conflict, what we're not looking at is what's beneath that, which is that the relationship itself doesn't likely hold water. Because if the relationship itself was stable, we wouldn't need to be constantly avoiding the conflict. We wouldn't be in that loop in our head of what do I need to do or say to make everything be okay. We would be able to show up with what's true.
Oh, okay. So if you feel like you're sort of walking on eggshells then it's because the relationship itself isn't based in authentic connection. Then it's
That's
not
right.
as solid as you might want it to be.
That's right.
Oh, this is so good.
It is.
So good.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. That was a big aha for me. Great. Okay. So how do we do this? So let's say like something common that happens when people are really working on getting healthier again is, there's somebody around who is bringing stuff into the house and, it's tempting. How would you set a boundary around that?
So, there's two layers here. We can work with a script where we can make a request.
Okay.
And I want to be really clear about saying that a request only works when we're dealing with a reasonable human being.
Okay.
So a request does not work with a narcissist, for example.
Okay.
So we have to know that we're working with a reasonable human being.
Okay.
And so it could be, especially around the holidays, I really feel uncomfortable that you're bringing so much cake and candy into the house. The request can be, are you willing to eat that stuff on your own outside of the house and not bring it in? Are you willing to keep it in a place that's not common, that's not common access? Something like that. That's a request that you can make. And then the other person can say yes or no. But regardless, we still have to be prepared with what we're going to do if the other person says no, and what we're going to do if the sugar is sitting there in the kitchen on the counter. And that's why I'm saying it's up to us to decide what we're going to do. And, you bring up temptation. And so what I want to really share here is that, so much is said about willpower or discipline, especially when it comes to our health. And it's not actually about that. What's happening is we are in service of a commitment that we're not aware of. So a commitment to stay safe, a commitment to feel loved, a commitment to be liked. That's old. So, if we're committed to comfort instead of committed to our health, that's what drives us to make unhealthy choices.
Okay.
So no amount of discipline, no amount of self-control, no amount of restriction is going to be able to move the needle on the mindset and around the conscious commitment that we need to put into place. So whenever there's a discrepancy between what we say we want and what we're actually experiencing, it's because there's this old, outdated, underlying commitment in the mix. I say I want to eat healthy, but what I'm experiencing is eating tons of sugar over the holidays. Or I say I want to, move my body every day. What I'm experiencing is sitting on the couch and watching TV instead. It's not about discipline. It's not about willpower. It's about realigning your commitment with your desire, because our strongest commitment can be, as I was saying before, to safety, to comfort, to struggle. Our underlying commitment can be to something else that isn't in alignment with what we really want. So we have to now, the grown-up version of ourselves, we now get to choose a conscious commitment to put in alignment with what we most desire. That's how change happens.
Okay. So if we are unconsciously or committed to pleasing other people so that we can feel loved,
Right.
then we can make these decisions but they're not going to stick because our underlying unconscious commitment.
That's right. So if I'm more committed to not disturbing the peace, if I'm more committed to making sure that you like me, and I come over, and you are feeding me something that I know is not good for me, I will abandon myself for the sake of you. And this is what happens. And the kicker here is we have this idea that the goal of relationship, any relationship, intimate partnership, friendship, family, that the goal of relating is harmony at all cost.
Yes.
But here's the deal. Harmony at all cost comes at a very, very high cost. Yeah. And it takes its toll on us.
Okay.
So, I see this note in the comments, and I really want to address this. Okay. Barbara says, taking care of ourselves is not selfish. And I'm going to go so far as to say, I'm going to flip this to say, let's embrace our selfishness. Let's stop disowning our selfishness. So selfish, I look at selfish, self-care, and self-love as three sisters whose job it is to support us in honoring ourselves. So we've made selfish bad. Yeah. But selfish itself is charge neutral. And so if we can step in and embrace selfish and see that the opposite, we praise people for being selfless. Yes. In selfless, I disappear. I vanish. So we want to really support being selfish in a healthy way. So again, this is really about the both and, not the either or, which is most people get hung up on selfish meaning that someone else goes without, or that if I take care of myself, someone else is not being taken care of. Yes. So we look at this as, if I take care of myself, it means I'm disrespecting or disregarding someone else. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying we need to give ourselves a seat at the table. We need to give ourselves that seat at the head of the table. Yes. And so from here, I really look at this like a three-prong approach. First, be willing to give yourself permission to consider your own needs at least as much as you're considering the needs of everyone else. I mean, what if we just all did that? What if you could really give yourself permission to consider your own needs at least as much as you consider the needs of everyone else? Then the next thing is, can you give yourself permission to consider your own needs more? Yeah. More than the needs of everyone else. And then the real boundary ninja move here is, are you willing to give yourself permission to consider your needs first before you consider the needs of everybody else? Yeah. And again, nowhere in here did I say, don't take anyone else into consideration. I'm simply saying, check in with what you need first. We're so used to orienting our antenna outward, right? What do they want? What do they need? What do they think? What do they feel? And then we fall in line. We have been packaging ourselves to be digestible to everyone else. So it's really about turning the antenna inward to be able to see, what do I think? What do I want? What do I need? What do I feel? And then making choices based on that, instead of basing our choices on what's going to buy me love, what's going to ensure safety, what's going to bring me comfort. But instead to really tap into, what is my desire here? I'm wondering if this is common, because this happened to me. After I got divorced, I realized I had been so busy worrying about the needs of my ex-husband all the time. And like, he was always top of mind, that if you were to say, put myself to even know what my needs were, I didn't even know what my needs were. I had so totally lost myself in him. Yep. And that was a huge process for me. It was just like, who am I? Yes. Do you find that, is that very common? Or tell me. It's incredibly common. Okay. And I have, because it's like, what are my needs? I don't even know what boundaries to set, because I don't even know what my needs are, That's right. Yeah. That's right. So the first thing is, we want, so for me personally, my own orientation, is that And really the most significant event of my life that has informed the rest of my life was my very ill brother dying when I was 2 years old.
Oh.
And so what this did was it started to kick in an imprint of beliefs that I began to hold around better I be self-sufficient and have no needs because his needs are greater than mine. Better I also, if I'm imperfect like he is because he was ill, if I'm imperfect like he is, I will die. So thus began the quest for perfectionism. Thus began the quest for, I will have no needs. I will be self-sufficient and independent, and I will take care of myself and not ask for help. And I will be defiant I will be righteous about not needing anyone else. And so then what happened is, as my life, tumbled forward, I end up marrying a man who it was as if on the day we met, he said to me, "Hi, I'm broken." And I said, "Well, great. I'm Superwoman. I will fix you." And as we became more enmeshed and as our relationship progressed, I sublimated all my wants and needs in service of his. And I really lost myself and lost any sense of myself in the marriage. And this is incredibly common. And so when we were separated and I was on my own, and I will say I was in a relationship where there was a lot of rage and a lot of control. Mm-hmm. So when I was on my own, it was a really new experience to start thinking about my own needs, because the only way that marriage stayed intact was by me enabling him to control. So control what I ate, what I wore, my body fat, the way I moved my body. Mm-hmm. And so when I was on my own, I had to really spend time examining, even to the point of like, what do I want to wear today?
Yeah.
Or what do I want to eat today? Or how do I want to move my body today? Do I want to move my body today? With no one watching and without having to prove anything to anybody else. And so this was a really defining moment. And in my book, I have a book called Worthy, Boost Your Self-Worth to Grow Your Net Worth. And it's about that intersection of self-worth and net worth. If we think we're not enough, if we believe we're not enough, we also believe we'll never have enough.
Yeah. Oh.
There's an exercise in that book called 50 Desires that I created because I was in the place of not even knowing one thing I wanted. I was so used to deferring my wants and needs to someone else. I was living life on someone else's terms, and I had no concept at all of what felt like a priority for me in my own life. So there's an abbreviated exercise of that in my latest book, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, as well. So, and really the whole orientation around boundaries is to first know, what is a priority for me? What's a non-negotiable for me? Yeah. What are the ways I'm going to get in touch with what is most self-honoring for me, to start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where, at least that's where I was, it's like, I don't even know what it is that I want. So then you got to go through this process and you discover, okay, who am I and what is it that I want? And then you start thinking, okay, how am I going to let other people know without sounding like a bitch?
Yep.
How am I going to let other people know what my boundaries are?
Yeah. And so, I'll say that the two things. One is, again, going back to our boundary, my boundaries are between me and me, even if they involve another person. Mm-hmm. So not every boundary needs to be spoken. Ooh. Because if it's up to me to honor my own boundary, then I'm the one who needs to know that I'm putting my money where my mouth is.
Okay.
We absolutely can express boundaries to other people, express our boundaries, and we can, but what I'll say about this is if we verbalize a boundary, we want to make sure that we are going to uphold it. Otherwise, we're the little girl or little boy who cried wolf. So if we're going to express the boundary, then we really need to know that we are going to stand by what we say. Otherwise, we teach people how to treat us. So if we're not going to stand by ourselves, we can't expect anyone else to be willing to.
Yeah. I'm scribbling everything down that you're saying.
Yeah. And so, and the other thing I'll say is, all of this can be done with grace and with love. This doesn't have to be done out of fear. It doesn't have to be done out of conflict. It doesn't have to be done with apology. This is a big one, especially for women.
Oh.
We don't need to apologize for our truth.
Yeah.
We don't need to give a reason or an excuse for our truth. And here's something I'll add here. It's not my responsibility to manage anyone's response to my own truth. So if I say what's true for me, it's not my responsibility to manage your experience of my truth. And so, because that's another way we cross our own boundaries. I cross my boundary into your territory, trying to manage you and your experience. And that's manipulation. That's control.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. That was a huge light bulb for me. I don't know about anybody else. So if I am trying to manage somebody else's feelings to what it is that is my truth, then I'm manipulating them.
That's right.
I'm actually crossing their boundaries too.
That's right.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I go, let's say that I go home for Christmas and my mother, and this isn't happening this year, obviously, but let's say, my mother makes her Russian tea cakes. And, this is like one of these gifts that she's always done. Like she makes Russian tea cakes every year. And I love them, but I can't eat Russian tea cakes because they're just going to send me off on a sugar spiral.
Yep.
And so I have made a decision that I'm not going to be eating her Russian tea cakes anymore. And she presents me with the Russian tea cakes and I say, thank you so much, Mother, but I leave them and I don't touch them. And she comes up to me later and she says, why aren't you eating them? I worked really hard on those. Like, I know you love them. And, why aren't you eating that? And I explain, well, I've made a decision. I'm not going to be eating sugar and flour products anymore. If I try to manage her emotions around that, I'm actually crossing her boundaries. I'm trying to manipulate her.
You're you're crossing the boundary between the two of you. You're because that's where codependency and enmeshment comes in. When I don't know where I end and you begin. And I think that the only way I'm going to be okay is if you're okay. And so I want you to regulate me emotionally. Okay. So you're wanting to know your mother's okay, because then you'll feel okay. And so it's really about, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to sit with the discomfort of my mother not being happy, but really getting, I can't make someone else happy. I can't make someone else mad. Their feelings are their feelings.
Oh, that is huge. That is so huge.
And, we can do things ahead of time. So this would be a place of like, hey, Mom, I'm coming. And I know that you love to give me these tea cakes. I'm just letting you know ahead of time. This year, I'm not going to eat any. I'm not available to receive them. I'm making a choice. And then she can go into a whole whatever. She can go into her whole tizzy about it. And it's just like, hey, Mom, I so appreciate that you love to make these. And I'm just letting you know ahead of time, I'm not going to take any with me. And so to just keep coming back to that. And then,
like my mother, though, she's going to say, well, why? Like, what's wrong with a little bit of, and she's going to want a huge.
And then, And then that's when, so just because someone wants an explanation doesn't mean we have to give it to them.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I call the company line, to come back to, Mom, I'm just letting you know ahead of time, I'm not going to be taking any of the tea cakes with me. I'm not going to be eating any of the tea cakes this year. And then she says, well, why? Well, why? Mom, I've made a choice. I've made a decision. I'm not going to be eating any of the tea cakes this year.
So there's no explanation. There's just, this is the fact.
You may say that 27 times.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is so huge because I can't begin to tell you how often I am trying to manage other people's emotions for them.
Yeah. Yep.
And I had no idea. Stephanie says this is empowering. I mean, have you seen the chat? There's just lots.
I have. Yep. I'm reading the chat as we go. I love the chat. Yep.
Yeah. This is great. So if I am in the process of trying to manage other people's response to my truth, I can't keep saying this enough, that this is my boundary violation.
That's right. 100%.
I'm violating their boundaries, basically, is what you're saying.
It's not even that you're violating their boundary. It's that you're really violating the boundary between the two of you. I would say it that way. that you're crossing your own boundary out of, like, you're crossing the line out of your own territory into someone else's.
Okay. So that's kind of what a boundary is then, is I have my feelings and my response and my own inner life, and this person has their response
That's
and
right.
their inner life. And anytime I'm trying to move over into their inner life and manage that, I am crossing a boundary.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know how much freedom this gives us?
Yes, I do. That's why the book is called Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free. I do indeed.
Oh my gosh. Like I don't have to worry about how other people respond anymore.
That's right.
Let them have their response. Okay.
That's right. And so, the other piece of that is, and I look at this, and this is just to go back to what we were saying earlier about how are we looking at the way that we define boundaries, and how are we, and what does it mean if we verbalize our boundary to someone else? I also look at it as the way that we're giving people an opportunity to know us more deeply. We're giving them a page of our operating system. We're giving them a piece of our puzzle. Boundaries really are a gift in that regard, because we're really letting someone in. The boundaries do increase the capacity for connection and communication and intimacy, instead of going off of an old pattern of acquiescing or of collapsing.
Yeah, I can see how, in my marriage, like there was not any sort of authenticity in the relationship, because I was always so busy trying to manage his feelings that I couldn't really be myself, and I didn't even know who I was anymore after a while.
Right.
It sounds like you experienced the same thing in your marriage.
Yes.
How could you have any sort of authentic connection with anybody in those situations? So, yeah. There was one statement in the chat that I want to address.
Sure.
That was somebody who said, I can't find it right now, but she said, this is really hard with children.
Mm-hmm.
She just made that statement, like, this is really hard with children. So,
right.
In my experience, trying to manage the emotions or helping young children manage their own emotions and all of that. But then as they grow into teenagers and young adults, it's like it's such a quagmire. It is.
So it is. And so there's, one of the things that I'll mention is that obviously when we're dealing with little kids, we are their caretakers. We are their guardians. We are responsible. We do need to care for them. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean we can't care for ourselves as well. And that's a big piece, because again, the mothers tend to go into the mother guilt and into the either or. It's one or the other. And what I'll say about guilt in this context is that guilt in this context is an indicator that we are taking care of ourselves, that we're honoring ourselves.
Okay.
So if we feel guilty about making ourselves a priority, guilty about taking care of our own needs, guilty about doing something just for us, it means that we are actually showing up to honor our own needs.
So we might want to then just expect to feel a little bit guilty.
And welcome the guilt, because again, the guilt is the indicator. If you feel a little guilty, then it's like, oh, I'm on the right track.
Okay.
And so then what happens is, this enmeshment with kids often goes into teenage or adulthood, and we don't separate, or we don't pull back, and we don't actually, we still keep crossing the boundary into their territory.
Yeah.
Instead of letting them actually be who they are. And remembering that my life is not defined by my offspring, that I actually have a responsibility to myself to look out and take care of what I need to take care of for me.
How many of us parents, we have this tendency to define our lives by what happens to our offspring.
That's right. Or I'm only as happy as my saddest child. I've heard someone say that before.
Oh, really?
I'm only as happy as my saddest child. Right. And so it's the way that's the codependency. We're looking for someone else to do something so that we'll feel better.
Okay. Is that how you would define codependency? How would you?
I would define codependency as looking for someone outside of us to regulate us emotionally.
Okay.
Or, we're wanting some external force. So in other words, we're not coming from the place of intrinsically, organically, authentically with our own agency, stepping into our emotions or our feelings or our well-being. we're wanting someone else to influence that in a positive way, particularly. Or it's, I'll say it this way too, it's like, I want to take someone else's temperature to know how I feel, or the mood matching. I'm going to look at someone else's weather pattern, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm in that same weather pattern.
Okay. So I want to just reiterate so that everybody gets it correctly, what codependency is. And what I have is it's looking to someone else to regulate our own emotions. That's codependency. Okay. Yeah. Write that down, everybody, because that is super, super important to understand. Anytime that you are depending on how another person feels in order for you to feel good or better, then that's codependency. A lot of us are way more codependent than we realize. So
because we've come to this place where we're so uncomfortable sitting with our own discomfort. And so that's when we go into that loop of, what do I need to do or say to make everything be okay?
Yeah.
And that's anything but authentic. That's anything but intimacy forging,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have, I'd like to just do a really quick patient scenario, just something that somebody told me about that I thought, wow, this feels to me like a classic boundary issue. And I'm wondering how to handle it. So this is a gentleman, and his wife invited some of her friends who are homeless right now. They're experiencing homelessness, maybe because of the pandemic. I'm not sure what the situation is, but she invited them to come in and stay with them for a short period of time. It was originally supposed to be a few weeks or something. They have ended up sort of taking advantage of the situation. They are staying there longer than expected, don't really seem to have any indications that they're planning to move out anytime soon. They are, of course, bringing all kinds of junk food into the house, so that makes things really difficult for him. They're up at night, interrupting his sleep. How would he go about setting boundaries around this?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that I, again, so I was saying before about the conflict, like there's a deeper issue. So there might be a deeper issue between him and his wife that had this occur without his input or without his being on board for it. So I don't want to
understanding just from having talked to him was that he was okay with it, that she had talked to him about it in the beginning and he was okay with it, imagining that it was going to be a really short-term thing.
Right. So it can be something to the point of, I'm no longer comfortable with either whether he's telling the guests themselves or he's telling his wife, I'm no longer comfortable with you staying here. And as of X date, my request is that you find somewhere else to be. So you can start there. It can also be that he decides he's going to be somewhere else. It cannot, so that he's not feeling like he's having to endure this.
Yeah.
If his wife isn't on the same page, if the guests aren't on the same page, he can also say, I'm just letting you know, I'm no longer comfortable with this arrangement. And my request is that you leave or they leave by X date. And if not, I'm just letting you know that I'm actually going to leave so that I can take care of my own needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's, those are the two things. The thing we don't want to do is throw ultimatums. So a boundary is not an ultimatum.
Okay.
The boundary is not, if they don't leave by this date, then blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Because that's actually a way that we disown our power, because we're letting someone else be the determiner of what happens to us.
Okay. Yes.
And we want to stay in the place of
staying in our own power,
staying in our own power and saying like, okay, I would like my house back, essentially, I'd like my house back, and I would like for them to leave. And if they're not going to leave by this date, I'm going to leave.
So this isn't,
it's not about punishment.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It's not about if they don't leave, then I'm throwing all their shit out on the street. I just, whatever, it's not that. It's not, it's not an ultimatum, and it's not about a power. It's not about a power dynamic. It's really about self-care. It's really about self-honoring. What's the most self-honoring action I can take?
Self-honoring. Got that. Yeah. This happens a lot with adult children who move in, and these kinds of situations happen all the time.
Yep.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right. Are you ready to take some questions from the audience?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, let me see what we got here. Annie says, I can set boundaries all day, but how do you enforce consequences? My husband crosses boundaries all the time, and I don't know how to set consequences. I love the script idea.
Right. So I'm flipping that, because it's not about enforcing consequences. That's not what this is. This is about taking care of yourself.
Okay.
So enforcing consequences implies that you want to punish someone else for their behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or want them to feel punished for their behavior.
Yes.
So again, it's not about enforcing consequences. It's about really being clear about what's okay for me and how am I going to take care of myself.
Okay.
And in terms of consequences, there will always be consequences to setting a boundary and not setting a boundary. So it's important to know what the consequences are if I set this.
Mm-hmm.
And we might, for ourselves, and I talk about this a lot in the book, look at our dreaded list of consequences as well as our list of exhilarating outcomes.
Oh, okay.
Because with every boundary we set there in our mind, we're going to make up the whole host of the dreaded list of consequences if we don't set if we set the boundary. But what we begin to find is that the consequences are worse if we don't set it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're thinking about what's going to happen if I just allow this situation to continue, and what are the consequences versus, and all of that pain, which is just like a constant unending agony, basically, for us.
Right.
What are going to be the consequences of me setting the boundary, which is going to be some sort of short-term possibly, but long-term, much, much better.
And that's the thing. We want to start getting more comfortable with the short-term discomfort. Mm-hmm. So we don't have the long-term resentment. Yeah. Resentment is the number one telltale sign that a boundary needs to be put into place, when we feel that resentment rising. And again, most of us think we're resentful at the other person, again, with, putting that outward. But the truth is that that's when we really have to make the shift out of blame and victim into responsibility and empowerment. How do I take responsibility for my own self here, mm-hmm. instead of putting myself at your mercy?
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you deal with walking on eggshells if it's with your adult child?
How do you deal with walking on eggshells if it's with your adult child?
Mm-hmm.
You have the choice about the walking on eggshells or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about what's the situation there that's having you walk on eggshells, and where do you need to speak your truth?
Mm-hmm.
What is the new dynamic that you want to support, as opposed to continuing to cater to the old pattern between the two of you?
Yeah.
And what often can happen in any relationship, when we start to evolve and change and grow, it can be confronting for the other person. And so we want to be sure that, we're staying in our own integrity, we're staying in our own alignment. But we also have to see that that if we change the relationship, if we change the dynamic, we're changing the rules of engagement. The other person might feel very confronted, mm-hmm. because they may not be willing to look at things in their own life the way that we are. And so, especially when it's parent-child, we have to see where the enabling is. I see this a lot when there's addiction involved. The most loving thing with an addicted family member is to set a boundary. Mm-hmm. We think we want to stay in the enabling. We think we don't want to polarize. We don't want to alienate. But the most loving thing often is setting a boundary with grace and love about what I will no longer tolerate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's possible that this adult child is having it could be some addiction issues, or
it could be
illness, mm-hmm. or something like that. That's causing them to be sort of emotionally viable. And so you're walking around there trying to manage their emotions for them.
And that's it. This is where we come back to the managing the emotions. This is where we come back to, trying to avoid conflict, trying to keep harmony at all cost, trying to keep the peace. And that doesn't do anyone any good. And what I'll really say here is that doesn't serve any relationship in any way, because it is feeding the relationship with inauthenticity instead of intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because here you are, like you're in all kinds of pain up and down and sideways, trying to, you're not being authentic because you can't even feel like you can be yourself. And so that's very, very stressful for you. And then the other person still gets to behave this way, and they're not going to heal as long as they're being allowed to continue to behave this way.
That's right.
So they're not going to see that there's a problem.
That's right.
So sometimes one of the most important things we can do is to speak our truth and set the boundaries, and that will force them to heal. And they might go through some heck, and that's up to them to manage their own emotions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
This is really hard stuff. This is not easy to do, but it is so important. And, would you agree having support to do this sort of thing is really important?
It is critical. I mean, it's really critical, because this can feel like lonely work. And this can feel like we're so used to the default. We're so used to the default. And this is really creating a whole new pattern for ourselves. But part of it is really getting clear on, what am I saying yes to and what am I saying no to? And that's where the choices have to begin. That's where the choices have to begin, because so many of us, especially the people pleasers and the peacekeepers and the conflict avoiders, we go into what I call the knee-jerk yes. A request is made of us, and we go into the knee-jerk yes. And we want to fix and heal and rescue and save. And we say yes out of some sense of responsibility or obligation. We don't want someone else to be hurt or upset or angry. We want to be the hero. We want to be the one and the only one. None of those reasons is a reason to say yes. Mm-hmm. The only reason to say yes to anything at all is desire.
Okay.
And so if we can build, it is humongous. So if we can begin the practice of building in the space to really check in with, is this a yes or a no? And I often will tell my clients, when a request comes in, if you can say no right off the bat, say no. If you're not ready to say no, simply say, I'll get back to you tomorrow, so that you get to build in the space to really consider, is it a yes or a no? Yes.
Okay. So no more of this knee-jerk, yes, whatever you want, like not even considering what you might be needing.
That's right.
That's huge. That's huge. Yeah. Okay, let me see. Here's another good question. My partner is not comfortable when I express my feelings, i.e., when I was upset about my IRS COVID check getting shredded. This made me realize how often I avoid potential conflict and minimize expression, happy or sad. Discussions don't work. I get frustrated and then am reckless about what I eat. How can I focus more on me and my health, not just us, when I don't feel heard or understood? I tend to cave on the boundaries I've created for myself. This is an awesome question.
This is a great question. So, there's an expression, don't go to the hardware store for milk. So if you know that your partner can't hold this, don't keep going there trying to be understood.
Oh, that's
fine. So it's like, maybe you have other friends or family members or, a support group where you can share in that particular way and feel met and heard and seen. But, there's the old expression about, the definition of insanity, right? Going back and doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And so the good news is she sees the correlation between not feeling understood and then, binging or making bad choices around her health. Mm-hmm. So it's part of it is to start separating those two things out so that they're no longer connected. They're no longer related. Not letting any external circumstance be what sends her into an unhealthy spin. Mm. And part of this is also recognizing what are our avoidant strategies, because we all have them.
Yes.
We all have our drugs of choice, whether they're food or alcohol or drugs or work or exercise or, Netflix, whatever it is. And it's not that any of these things are bad in and of themselves. It's when we use something to avoid feeling or dealing.
Okay.
And so that would be the thing, what is she avoiding trying to feel? And can she go and have her needs met in terms of connection and communication elsewhere, not somewhere where she already knows that she's not being met. And then this brings in the conversation from earlier that we're just looking at the surface, what's underneath, in terms of, do you want to be in relationship with someone where that open communication isn't invited? But again, when we're overly concerned with being understood, that's another way we can start to cross our own boundaries. We're so invested in someone else getting us that we do whatever it takes to be gotten, instead of just really standing solidly in our own sovereignty around, this is true for me. I don't need you to get it. I don't need you to understand why.
Yeah. This is my truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where the whole idea of really loving and appreciating and understanding your own desire and your own perspective and being like such a, what's the word I want, where you are so in love with yourself that the idea of missing anything that you think and feel is out of the question.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I love that. So she wants to know, how can she focus more on her? Is by learning how to do that,
That's by learning
how to really stop the food and start focusing on what is it that I'm needing right now. And then meeting those needs, not by going to the hardware store to buy milk. I love that.
That's right. Yeah.
I haven't heard that before.
It's great. I heard it when the first time I heard it, I was like, it makes so much sense immediately.
Yeah. So here is another question. How do you meaningfully resolve conflict then? For example, housemate not willing to keep cookies out of the house. How do you meaningfully resolve that conflict?
Yeah. So, again, the conflict has to come back to, what am I willing to do to take care of myself in the scenario? So if the housemate is not willing to keep the cookies out of the house, what am I willing to do? And what am I going to do so that I'm taking care of myself here? And, we can say till we're blue in the face, I feel really angry that you're unwilling to keep the cookies out of the kitchen. And here's how I'm going to take care of myself in the process. But it's not going to do any good to say, to in any way withhold something from the other person in terms of, and now because you won't do that, I'm going to reciprocate a punishment. And so again, I'll keep coming back to this. If you're living with someone who's really unwilling to support you in your own health, and you're living with someone who's really more committed to doing something that is presenting you with an unhealthy choice, then there may be ground rules that need to be returned to about the arrangement.
Okay, got it. All right, great. Well, we are out of time. I can't believe how fast this went. Oh, this has been so awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this, Nancy. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, if you really want to lose weight and keep it off for good, your next step is to sign up for Dr. Angela's free weight loss course, where you're going to learn everything you need to get started on your weight loss journey the right way. Just head over to journeybeyondweightloss.com/free course to sign up. Also, it would be awesome if you could take a few moments and write a review on iTunes. Thanks, and we'll see you in Journey Beyond Weight Loss.